At first glance, it looked like a scene no one wanted to believe was real. A quiet family home, no signs of forced entry, no desperate phone calls asking for help. Just silence, heavy, unsettling silence. When authorities stepped inside, they were not prepared for what they would find. An entire family was gone. Not one life lost, not two, but almost everyone who once filled that house with routine, arguments, laughter, and ordinary days. This was not a random crime. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was something far more disturbing, a tragedy born inside the home itself. The Kahler family lived what many would describe as an average life. They were not celebrities, criminals, or people who drew attention to themselves. From the outside, they appeared to be a typical family dealing with the same pressures millions face every day: financial stress, personal disagreements, and emotional strain. No one imagined that behind closed doors, something dark was slowly taking shape, something that would end in one of the most shocking family crimes in recent memory. Anthony Kahler was the head of the household. To neighbors and acquaintances, he was not someone who raised immediate red flags. He had been married, had children, and lived in a residential community where people waved to each other and went about their lives. But beneath the surface, Anthony was unraveling. His marriage was collapsing, his finances were in serious trouble, and his sense of control was slipping away piece by piece. What made this case so terrifying was not just what happened, but how quietly it happened. Anthony and his wife were in the middle of a bitter separation. Their relationship had deteriorated over time, filled with tension, arguments, and unresolved resentment. Divorce proceedings were underway, and with them came the fear of losing custody, losing financial stability, and losing the life Anthony believed he deserved. Court dates, legal documents, and mounting debt weighed heavily on him. To some, these are painful but manageable struggles. To Anthony, they felt like the end of everything. Inside his mind, a dangerous narrative began to form. He didn't see separation as a chance to rebuild or start over. He saw it as humiliation, failure, and loss of power. Friends later described him as withdrawn and increasingly bitter. He felt wronged, trapped, and desperate. And when desperation meets a distorted sense of entitlement, the results can be catastrophic. On the day everything changed, there was no dramatic announcement, no public breakdown. The crime unfolded quietly, methodically, and with chilling intent. Investigators would later piece together the timeline, realizing that this was not an impulsive outburst of rage. This was planned, calculated, executed with horrifying determination. Anthony began with the people closest to him, his own family. One by one, lives were taken inside the home. Each victim trusted him. Each believed they were safe. That trust was shattered in the most irreversible way imaginable. The house that once represented shelter and familiarity became the setting of unimaginable violence. What makes this case especially disturbing is the absence of chaos. There were no neighbors hearing screams, no immediate signs that something was wrong. The family simply disappeared from daily life. Missed calls, missed appointments, silence. Where there should have been activity, it was only when concern grew that authorities were alerted and the truth began to surface. When investigators entered the home, they were met with a scene that would haunt many of them for years. Multiple victims, all connected by blood and trust. There was no sign of struggle that suggested resistance. This wasn't a fight, it was an execution. The realization hit hard. This family had been erased from existence by someone who once claimed to love them. Anthony did not flee the country. He did not attempt to hide forever. After the killings, he left the scene, beginning a brief period where law enforcement searched for him. During this time, the public learned about the tragedy, and the shock spread quickly. People struggled to understand how someone could destroy their own family in such a complete and final way. As the investigation expanded, a clearer picture of Anthony's mindset emerged. He was drowning in debt. Legal fees were piling up. His home was at risk. He faced the possibility of losing access to his children. To him, these outcomes were unbearable. Instead of seeing consequences as temporary hardships, he saw them as an absolute end. In his twisted reasoning, He believed that if he couldn't have his family or control the situation, then no one else should. This way of thinking is not uncommon in family annihilation cases. The perpetrator often sees themselves as the central figure in the story, with everyone else existing as extensions of their identity. When that identity feels threatened, they respond with extreme, irreversible actions. The Kahler family case fits this pattern with chilling precision. Eventually, Anthony was located by authorities. What followed was not a dramatic standoff or a denial of responsibility. The evidence was overwhelming. The story was already written in blood. The legal process that followed focused not on whether he committed the crime, but on understanding why and determining how justice would be served. But no courtroom outcome could undo what had been done. Children who never got the chance to grow up. A spouse who never got the chance to move on. A family line abruptly and violently cut short. The community was left grieving, confused and asking the same question that echoes in every case like this. How could this have been prevented? The Kahler family case forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the greatest danger does not come from strangers or criminals lurking in the dark. Sometimes it comes from someone sitting at the dinner table, hiding their rage behind a familiar face. The warning signs are often subtle, buried beneath stress and silence, easy to dismiss until it is far too late. And as investigators closed the case files and the media moved on, one thing remained painfully clear. This was not just a story about violence. It was a story about control, despair, and the devastating consequences of a mind that chose destruction over responsibility. As the legal process moved forward, the emotional impact of the Kahler family case only deepened. Courtrooms are often places of procedure and formal language, but this case carried a heavy, suffocating weight. Every detail that emerged painted a clearer picture of not just what happened, but how completely a single person's decisions erased an entire family. Prosecutors laid out timelines, forensic findings, and digital evidence that left little room for doubt. This was not an accident. It was not a momentary lapse in judgment. It was the final outcome of long-building resentment and a desire to control the narrative at any cost. Anthony Kahler eventually admitted responsibility. His statements revealed a mindset driven by bitterness and perceived betrayal. He spoke of feeling cornered by legal obligations, overwhelmed by financial collapse, and humiliated by the idea of losing his role as the dominant figure in his family. What stood out to experts was not just his anger, but his inability to see his family members as independent human beings. In his thinking, their lives were tied to his success or failure. Once he believed his life was over, he decided theirs should end as well. Psychologists often describe this type of offender as someone who externalizes blame. Rather than accepting accountability, they view themselves as victims of circumstance. Anthony blamed the legal system, his failing marriage, and financial pressure, but none of those factors explain the deliberate choice to take innocent lives. Stress does not pull a trigger. Debt does not plan an execution. Those choices belong solely to the person who commits them. In court, the victims were given voices through impact statements read by extended family members and loved ones. These statements described children who had dreams, routines, and personalities that would never fully develop. They spoke of a spouse who was trying to move forward, not destroy. The grief was raw and permanent. No sentence, no verdict could restore what had been lost. Justice in cases like this is always incomplete. The sentencing phase focused on ensuring Anthony would never again have the ability to harm anyone. The court emphasized the scale of the crime and the betrayal of trust involved. When a person kills within their own family, the damage extends far beyond the immediate victims. It shatters the sense of safety for everyone who hears the story. Parents begin to question, spouses reflect, communities feel uneasy, wondering how something so horrific could happen in a place that once seemed normal. Media coverage of the case spread rapidly, drawing attention to a disturbing pattern seen in similar crimes around the world. Family annihilations often follow a familiar path: escalating stress, isolation, a fixation on control, and a belief that others exist as possessions rather than people. The Kahler case became another tragic example used by experts to warn about the importance of early intervention, mental health support, and recognizing warning signs before they escalate into irreversible actions. One of the most haunting aspects of this case is how ordinary it appeared from the outside. There were no dramatic public threats, no viral videos predicting disaster, just a slow emotional collapse hidden behind closed doors. This is why such cases are so difficult to prevent. They grow quietly, feeding on silence and denial, until one day the consequences explode into the open. Investigators later noted missed opportunities, moments where anger, obsession, and control might have been noticed earlier. But hindsight is always clearer than reality. People rarely imagine that someone they know, someone they share meals with, could be capable of such violence. That disbelief is part of what allows these tragedies to unfold unnoticed. The Kahler family case also sparked discussions about responsibility and choice. While mental and emotional stress can explain behavior, it does not excuse it. Millions of people face divorce, debt, and personal loss without harming others. What separates those outcomes from this tragedy is not circumstance but decision. Anthony made a series of choices that led to a permanent outcome. Those choices ended lives that could have continued, healed, and changed. For the surviving relatives, life after the crime became a long process of mourning, without closure. Holidays became reminders of absence. Birthdays passed in silence. The future they imagined, watching children grow, rebuilding relationships, was replaced by memories and unanswered questions. This is the lasting damage of crimes like this. They don't end when the courtroom doors close. They echo through generations. Today, the Kahler family case stands as a grim reminder of how fragile the idea of safety can be when control turns into obsession. It forces us to confront uncomfortable realities about anger, entitlement, and the dangers of viewing loved ones as extensions of one's own ego. It challenges the assumption that family automatically means protection. This story is not just about a crime. It is about warning signs ignored, emotional breakdowns left untreated, and the devastating consequences of choosing domination over empathy. It reminds us that accountability matters, that seeking help matters, and that no personal crisis ever justifies the destruction of innocent lives. In the end, what remains is silence, the kind that follows irreversible loss. A home that will never sound the same, names that will only be spoken in remembrance, and a case that continues to haunt those who study it, not because it is rare, but because it is terrifyingly human.